I was Bob's neighbor, as was the person whose words I'll be reading today. These are not my words, but these are Bethany Longwear's words that she asked me to read for her today. For anyone who doesn't know me, I am Bethany Longwear, a former student and later friend and neighbor to our beloved Bob Baden. Just calling him Bob is odd for me. My entire existence has been one of calling him Mr. Baden, or Sir. That shows the incredible amount of respect I have for this man. I'm sure many others of you feel the same way. I first knew Mr. Baden as a band dad to his son Rob. Rob was slightly younger than me and a bass drum player for the BUHS marching band. Mr. Baden was one of many faithful parents who attended our high school functions. How he suffered through high school marching and concert bands, knowing his appreciation of classical and jazz, I'll never know. But I believe he did it due to the incredible amount of love for his son and copious amounts of earplugs. I later attended WVWC and was a major in the music department. I was reintroduced to Mr. Baden as a student and began to know him as the man I developed incredible admiration for over the years. He and the late David Doc Milburn were conductors for concert band and wind ensemble. One of my peers, Travis Steinling, stated it best recently when he said, quote, "Baden always scared the hell out of me in rehearsal because he was so intense. But then there were those moments when the baton was away that he would joke around and let you know that he valued you as a person, not just as a cog in a well-oiled musical machine. I'll never forget the lessons I learned through his example." Truer words have never been spoken. He was intense. For those of you under the laid-back Doc regime, you remember Mr. Baden taking the podium because of his distinct differences in leading a rehearsal compared to Doc. While Doc was laid back in rehearsal, Baden was just the opposite. When he took the podium with the baton in his hand, you sat up a bit straighter, you tried a little harder, you paid just a little more attention to the little nuances in the music. You became slightly more intense yourself when he was running rehearsals, or in general, because he was an intense guy. That is, until you really got to know him. I really began my journey with Mr. Baden in January 2000. One of my work-study assignments in college was to organize and catalog the jazz band library over the olden days of J-term. Yes, when I wasn't attending class. The jazz band library was located behind Mr. Baden's office in the percussion room down the hall from here. I began that J-term feeling like I was completely invading his sacred percussion space, and I was a little terrified. But by the end of the month, we were trading cups of coffee, and he had completely suckered me into taking marimba lessons with him the following semester. Taking marimba lessons with him helped forge the bond that I had with this man even more over the following semester in small weekly half-hour increments. I had working knowledge of how a marimba functioned. I could play some piano, and it's laid out the same, so the basics I could breeze through without trying or practicing, and trust me, Mr. Baden noticed. Even though I was constantly reminding Mr. Baden that I was taking this for fun, he never let me slack when he saw my potential. He always gave 100% and expected his students to do the same. Soon my fun marimba lessons turned into Mr. Baden challenging me to learn 4 mallets, because there was simply no reason I couldn't do it with hard work. He would always comment about trusting me to practice even more each week. Imagine the fun it'll be when you learn to trust your skills playing with 4 mallets. Oh, the things you'll do. In 2009, I opened Hometown Market with my husband Morgan, and our business blessed me to be a next-door neighbor to one of my favorite curmudgeons, until we closed this past September. When moving in, Mr. Baden stopped by to say hello and asked me if I was still playing music. One of my favorite memories of him involves my husband. Mr. Baden loved his motorcycle, and Mr. Baden loved his classical music. Morgan asked me one day in the first days of our business, who the heck was the guy driving down the street on his motorcycle in his full leathers blaring, yes blaring, opera? I couldn't help but laugh and explain, oh, that's Mr. Baden. You'll get to know him. Morgan not only got to know him, but treasured the time that he came in the shop while we were there. During our 5-year run at Hometown Market, Mr. Baden was a regular. By regular, I mean 3 to 4 times a week regular. Mr. Baden would come eat lunch, crack jokes, grab coffee, always the full-strength, dark roast Ethiopian Yirgacheffe, and no other would do in his French press. Dressed like Johnny Cash with a cane, he became a staple at Hometown Market, someone myself and my customers came to love. Saturday mornings were always one of my favorites because he would call and tell me to put on a pot of coffee because he was on his way over in 5 minutes. Most Saturdays found him reminiscing about his days playing out in his band or a time in the Air Force Band. He really was such an accomplished musician, and I relished listening in his stories about what he called the good old days. Talking about them, you could always tell how much he missed those and took an incredible amount of pride in what he accomplished in his younger, though wilder days. Other days he would begin asking me the questions about former students. Have you heard about Ian and Ann and how well they're doing? You know, Ian will be at the Strawberry Festival with his band. That makes it almost worth going to the parade. Almost. I can watch it on TV, right? I know he's bound to come see me if he's in town. Or he'd say, Keela was always so quiet. I worried about her. I'm so glad to hear that she's come out of her shell over the years. Things like, you remember Matt and how skilled he is on piano? He's coming back to teach a master class with students next month. That should inspire plenty of these young folks to get back in those practice rooms. He had hundreds of students over the years and remembered all of us first and second generation kids with the same clarity as when he knew us during our formal years. He would also come to the shop and talk about current students. You really should make it to so-and-so's piano recital tomorrow. It will be magnificent. Or, I've taught so many kids over the years, and this one just continues to blow me away. And he would finish with, percussion ensemble concert should be a do-not-miss event, kiddo. Tell your customers to come. Here's a poster. No excuses. He took an incredible amount of pride in being a part of the greatness that we would become as adults. I hope he realized the significant role he played in that in so many of our lives. He found that pride not only with our accomplishments, but also with his music. One time he called me on his cell phone at the shop and asked, Kiddo, do you know where the hell I can get an anvil? My reaction was probably, what the heck do you need an anvil for? He explained that there was this song, and he needed an anvil, so he was on the hunt, and thus began the great anvil search of 2012-2013. He stated that he tried everything to replicate the sound, but it had to be the real thing. So soon, half of Wesleyan and most of Buchanan was on the anvil hunt. After several phone calls and resounding, no brake plates or a jewelry anvil, it just won't work, kiddo. We found exactly what he was looking for. It probably took 5+ men to move the thing across town, but it didn't matter because it was exactly what was needed for that particular piece of music. Though there were just a few bangs of the anvil during the song, it wasn't insignificant or too much of a burden to acquire because it made the song perfect. No small detail was seen as insignificant to this man. As I got to know Mr. Baden better, I noticed these small details about him. The way he called Mel Meadows, whom 99% of the world calls Mel, I'm sure of it. He called her Melody. The way he called me kiddo every single time he entered my shop, but sweetheart on his departure therefrom. The occasional woman he would flirt with while sitting behind my counter drinking his coffee was always the one who came in looking frazzled and needed that pick-me-up that day, and she left in a better mood because of him. The way he came every day for months after my dad's death just to check in on me like it was no big thing. The flustered way he discussed students who didn't practice that week in a way that showed concern because he knew they weren't living up to their potential. The way he let students decorate his house for the holidays, not because that he cared for the lights necessarily, but it was a big deal for them. And heck, he had a house, so they might as well use it. The way he offered strangers he just met the use of his inversion table located in his basement, because he believed if it helped his back, well, it could help theirs. I've been on that table. The way he cracked jokes with my husband about music, in particular Morgan's early days while he was beginning to learn mandolin. Before he left, though, and when the laughter was over, he always encouraged him by saying that he sounded better each time he was in the shop, and most of all, keep practicing. My life was better for knowing Mr. Baden. The world lost a great man, musician, and friend on Saturday. Having hometown market next door to his house for 5 years gave me a chance to reconnect and develop a friendship with Mr. Baden that I will always cherish. Here's to blaring opera on motorcycles, coffee talks behind the counter, Saturday mornings sewing buttons onto his purple shirts before a concert, formal debates, little black books, the great anvil search of 2012-2013, soup lunches full of great advice, love, and most of all laughter. In closing, I think Travis just might have described Mr. Baden the best, intense. Intense in his love for his son, his co-workers, fellow musicians, students, and those of us who were lucky enough to call him a friend.
At this time, if it's okay, I think maybe for just a couple of minutes, we could maybe open the floor up if anybody feels compelled to come forward and share a story, an anecdote, anything like that. We can certainly do that. The piece was Hammersmith, by the way, that we needed the anvil for. And I didn't understand why a brake drum wouldn't just work fine, but you know what? Bob was right. And it was those little details. Is there anybody that would like to?
I will.
Yeah. Mandy Spivak. Because I can stand up here and talk all day, but y'all don't know what that happens.
was in my office a lot, sitting on my couch, actually Larry's couch. It's still your couch, Larry, but it's mine now. We had lots of talks, and he was a constant friend since I have been here. I have two quick stories because I will remember them forever. The first one is basically how we met, because he goes to James and says, "Spivak, does she have any relation to Charlie Spivak?" James is like, "I don't know, go ask her." And so he walks up to my office and he said, "Hey, kiddo, you any relation to Charlie Spivak?" I said, "Well, yeah, he's my granddad." Turns out, when Bob was at FSU, Charlie Spivak is famous big band leader from the 40s, went through Tallahassee and needed a pickup band. And Bob played in my granddad's pickup band in Tallahassee as he was going north. So we had this bond, and I was apparently really cool from that moment on to him, you know? So that was a great story. The second one is shorter. Juries. I have to look in his office, because I think he might have every pen I ever owned, from needing to use it to sign jury sheets. So I'm going to go in there afterwards and see if there's a stash of my pens, because I never got them back. But anyway, he will be missed. He was a great, great man and very fun. So thank you.
Anyone else like to share a story? He certainly was a lot of fun. Absolutely.
Like many others of you here, I'm not sure that I can repeat anything that Bob ever said to me in this venue. So I'm not going to tell any stories on him, but I do have a tribute that was written by Melody Meadows. She asked me to read it for you here today. She says that Bob was demanding. He was not willing to settle and insisted that his ensembles develop the highest possible level, which often meant rehearsing the same thing over and over. As a student in his concert band for several years, I can vouch for that one. And yet they kept coming back. The students kept coming back. The students wanted to be part of a well-rehearsed group as well. Bob knew how to do it. This was his second teaching career. After 30 years in the public schools, he added almost another 20 years here at Wesleyan. And with this, he set an example for generations of students who admired him. Alumni adored him. His colleagues respected him. And now we honor his many significant contributions with our presence here. He was one of a kind, singular, dominant. We will miss seeing him in his hat with his stately cane. We will miss the roaring expletives that were standard fare for all of his jokes. We'll miss sitting next to him at a faculty meeting, listening to his running commentary, filled with both wit and insight. We mourn for his loss as we celebrate his life, feeling richer for having known him. The Baden stories will live on. He was who he was at every moment, an enormously rare quality in my experience. We enjoyed and shared a sense of humor, a sense of the ridiculous, and a certain irreverence toward the world. And finally, after watching his heroic efforts at the end of his life, in his last teachable moment, I learned one last lesson from Bob, and I'm honored to have called him my friend.
Anybody else? Well, I guess it's my job now that some things